This is the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom show, the Wake Up Call on WCOM 103.5 on your FM dial or live streaming at WCOM-FM.org. You can also watch the show on the People's Channel after a week's delay on Thursday night at 10 p.m., Friday morning at 6 a.m., or Tuesday at noon. The show will also be available on our YouTube channel, Wilf Wake Up Call. I'm here, Schwinzer, here with our host, Lori Hoyt, and Emily O'Hare on the camera. Today our special guests are Emily Keel, Ann Weston, and John Joe.
Thanks, Iris. We're playing not musical chairs, but musical mics today. We've got 3 mics, and we'll just share it around. We're just delighted to have you all, and we're going to be talking about, I think it's the first time for us, about green burial. And I think some of you may have heard that term. I've heard a little bit about it at the senior center one time, and but there's a lot I don't know about it, and so we're going to find out more about it and why it's such a good idea. So Ann, so Ann is, you have the Green Burial Project, which we'll find out more about from you.
That's correct.
And John is a casket maker, and but a environmentally kind of casket, and we'll certainly find out more about that. So let's start out with you, Ann.
What can I tell you? What would you like to know?
Well, first, just the main salient points about what does green burial mean?
Excellent.
Green is a word that we know we connect with the environment, so my sleuthing mind says it's got a connection there, but tell
You're
us.
absolutely right about that. There are 3 points, 3 standards for green burial, and if you remember nothing else about what I say today, remember these 3 things. The first is there would be no embalming. Embalming puts formaldehyde into the environment that's unnecessary, and in North Carolina you do not need to be embalmed. The second thing is that you would have no vault in the grave. Now this is the more difficult piece to take care of when you're trying to get yourself buried, because most cemeteries today require the use of either a concrete or a steel vault to enclose the coffin. And the third item is biodegradable coffins or shrouds. This means no metal, no toxic varnishes or finishes, as few metals as possible, and if you want to go with a shroud, let's think about something that is biodegradable and a natural material. Wool, cotton, silk, linen, bamboo, all those kinds of things.
Yeah.
So that's, if you distill it to its smallest nutshell, that's it.
And I forgot to mention that Emily Keel is here, and she is the one who found Ann and John for our show, and is here to also help interview and talk about green burial. You know, as the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, one of our big issues is the environment. And so this fits right along with our mission, that it's something that is environmentally much, much better. I just learned already, I knew a little bit about green burial, a little bit, but I did not know that they currently, most cemeteries require a vault, because I remember my mother, when she died, and my father, well, I remember us going and picking out a casket, but it, you know, it was wood, it wasn't a plain pine box, it was a wood with probably a varnish or a very pretty wood, but it was wood, it was not any kind of a vault, so that was a shocker. And so I think it's even worse than I thought. But so John, you make these natural kind of caskets?
I make what I call, it's a plain pine box, literally. The wood, get wood from Chatham County, so it's from sustainable practices for southern yellow pine down there. The mill lets me pick through and find the ones with the grain that I like, so it doesn't, it's not, each individual board has its own personality, and that's what I'm looking for. It is designed to be completely biodegradable in the ground. I started this as a technical problem that I wanted to solve. We had had too much death in the family in an 18-month period. We lost, my wife and I had gone into that period in the center of 5 generations, and we came out the center of 3 generations. One of those is off absolutely the wrong end of that. So you spend a lot of time thinking about death, and
Yeah.
but for me, also the way we mark death, the way we interact with it, what are the ceremonies? So what started as a technical thing, which is where Ann is with the biochemistry of it, is that fair?
Yes.
And the legal aspects, which is also technical. I started there, but it took a turn into the spiritual for me, and part of what I want to do is enable other families to, if that's where they want to go, to also be involved at that level of doing for your own and caring for your own. If I can tell a quick story.
Sure.
My mom died at home, which is ideal, I think. But of course, we're caring for her right up into the moment of death. And then in the traditional modern thing, what do? You call the funeral home. Suddenly, the person that you've been caring for very intimately, it's suddenly kind of a hands-off thing. They take the body away, they prepare the body. That, to me, is wrong. Why would we stop caring at that point? Where is the healing? Where is the last thing I get to do? For me, it was in the wood shop. I was building that casket while she was in hospice there, and in that stage, I was taking my turn we were taking turns every 8 hours on the care at the end. But my healing, or my working through it, was in the wood shop, because I'm really not a support group kind of guy. I need some power tools for that kind of healing. And it was huge for me because she was riding along with me in my head throughout this building process, where strange, funky boards that maybe I would have otherwise for somebody else put in the floor, I thought, you know, she liked the strange and funky, which I think I benefited from that, but they were front and center because it was built for her. So anybody who can capture that level of involvement, whether it's woodworking, caring for the body at home, a home funeral, I would encourage anyone to try to recapture that, and we need to own that again because it feels right.
So, when you were experiencing so many deaths in your family, you already were a person who liked to work with wood and had those skills, so so you were able to get into your workshop and have the skills to build a simple but nice coffin for your mom.
That's it, you know, these are skills I've developed over a lifetime of
Yeah.
making stuff and doing things, and I never expected to apply it to that, but it felt like a calling at that point. What can I do with the skills that I have, and how can I make the world more like I would like the world to be?
Yeah, and I like especially where there's no varnishes, you keep the wood just natural.
Well, I'll do it. I'll put an oil finish on it.
An oil
and
finish.
that brings out the look of it.
Do-
It is not, according to the Green Burial Council, it does not poison the world. I use a tung oil, so it's a very light finish. It just, my woodworking is different in that I know that it's going to start being destroyed very soon. If I build you a table, at least in my head, I'm thinking, you know, she's going to hand that down. 100 years from now, people are going to say, that's a table. Not my stuff. My stuff is going to go into the ground, or it's going to be burned up middle of next week. But in the meantime, it's more like arranging flowers for me for a funeral. It's a very temporary thing. a ceremonial piece. But the oil is there because I want people to touch it. I want people to interact with it.
And
I
see
encourage-
the beauty and the grain of the wood.
But to interact, I've encouraged families, they'll paint a tree on it or they'll write on it. Mine is, I don't want my stuff to be the end. I want you to be involved. One of the most beautiful ones, the family painted a bare tree trunk on the lid. The guy's daughters painted it, before the services. At the services, they had saucers of 3 different colors of green paint, so that everyone was encouraged to come up and put a thumbprint for a leaf on that tree. So instead of walking up to the casket and like I do and think, this is awkward, how long do I stand here? I don't really know what to do. There was something to do, and it said you have to touch, you have to interact, and it's okay to touch. And if it's okay to feel like this, maybe it's okay to feel like this. That's kind of what it's become for me.
So this has become, you started out for your own family, but then you realized that this is something that you could help other people.
That is absolutely the goal,
I
and
agree.
the interactions with those other people, the stories, that people will come to me with an idea. So, okay, well, let's talk about that idea. Some ideas, I'll say they're good ideas, but they're not for me. Someone wanted a casket that looked like an escape pod from Star Trek. Fun idea, that's not what I do. But another man wanted a mail slot.
A what?
A mail slot. They wanted a way for, his idea was they wanted a way for the people at the funeral to leave a private message. That would be, it would go into the casket. It's purely symbolic, it's dark in there, nobody's gonna read it. But it would go into the casket. So we designed and implemented a slot that could be opened up. We figured, okay, that should fall near his father's right hand. So, in the service, and we heard later from them that that was what they needed to happen. And to have been invited into their need and to be able to do something, that's fulfilling work.
Yeah. So how long have you been doing this?
I think it's about 4 years. I was looking at the books and thinking, yeah, we've been not profitable for 4 years now. We have been treading water, but again, it's the fulfilling part is there.
And back to you, Ann. How long have you been involved with this idea of green burial?
Well, my story is much more pedestrian, I'm sorry to say, Laurie.
That's okay.
About 5 years ago, my husband and I found a new attorney to review and rewrite our wills. And one of the questions, and this is a Chapel Hill attorney, Beth Tillman, said, who gets the body? And an attorney had never asked me that before. And I said, well, what do you mean? And she said, when you die, what's going to happen to you? And I said, oh, we've got this figured out. We're going to be cremated because that's the greenest option. And she said, have you ever heard of green burial? There's a green burial place over in Wake Forest. Well, that opened up a whole new realm of possibilities for us because my husband and I have been recyclers and green advocates for a long, long time. We are old enough to have seen the first Earth Day back when we were in college. And so it just made so much sense and is so environmentally friendly relative to some of the options that people know that they have, that it was worth it to us to try to encourage new green burial grounds to open up in our community, so there would be something here for us.
So you wouldn't have to go to Wake Forest.
So we wouldn't have to go all the way to Wake Forest. And to give other people options, as I say, that they didn't know they had.
Yeah. Well, and Emily, is this when you first started hearing about green burial, when you met these great folks, or had you heard about it before? Or?
I heard about it from a friend of John's, and Heather Redding, who I believe works with you to help publicize it.
We work together through an organization called the Carolina Casket Makers Collective. It's largely to disseminate information and to, we refer people in what we think might be the direction for what they're looking for.
Well, I said to Heather casually at breakfast one morning, I will just be cremated, and she said, you don't want to do that. And she told me about all the horrors of cremation and the energy use, and then told me about green burials a bit. I read a bit more about that afterwards and find out that there's quite a movement, I think, amongst young people, particularly who feel they want to be one with nature and environmentally sensitive. It's also a less expensive way to be buried, I think. And for those like John who have cared for their family members, it seems a more natural transition. And I read a bit about the natural funerals, their home funerals and all. And the law, I mean, it's surprising. In North Carolina, there are very few laws restricting your own ideas, I think.
That's correct. And these ideas really feed in nicely to a peace and justice conversation, because there are any number of families that go into debt in order to bury their loved ones. Part of that is they just don't know that they don't have to go into debt. I was at a church giving a talk one time, and the ladies were concerned about a family that had recently buried one of their loved ones in the church cemetery, and they were talking about the expense of that. And one of the ladies turned to me and she said, well, how much would it cost me to get buried green? And the pastor was sitting there at the time, and I said, I noticed you have a cemetery out back. Does it cost anything for a grave, for a plot for one of your congregants? And he said, oh no, that's just part of being a member. You would get the plot. And I said, and do you require vaults? And he said, no. Oh, good heavens, no. And I said, do you require a certain kind of casket? Nope. I said, do you charge an opening and closing fee for the grave? Oh, no, the sexton takes care of that. And I said, how about perpetual care? He said, no, we don't charge for that. That's just a part of our church budget. That's overhead. So I looked at the lady again and I said, would you happen to have in your home a quilt that's no longer good for putting out on the guest bed, but you wouldn't throw it away for anything because somebody special to you made it? And she said, oh, do I ever? And I said, honey, you can get buried for free. Absolutely zero. Because you do not need a funeral director, and you do not have to buy a lot of goods and services. So when I say peace and justice, I'm talking about economic justice, where if you've got the money to buy an expensive funeral and it seems somehow important to your position in the community that people see you in a certain way, have at it. But let's not expect people to do the things that cost a lot of money that they're really getting no return for.
Yeah.
And when you think about dying and leaving your family with that sort of debt, where you have nothing for it, I think that's really, that's something that we need to fix.
I totally agree, and that's why I've thought about cremation, because, you know, none of my family has a lot of money. I don't believe in a lot of ostentation. You know, it's much more how we treat each other while we're here, and that there be some sort of dignity and some music, some you know, I thought of like a memorial service where we could say good things about each other or whatever. But, so this is opening up an alternative to cremation.
That's correct.
Which I do know is environmentally not the best either in terms of the energy used for the firing and
That's correct.
Yeah, but at least then the family is not into having to pay for an expensive plot
That's correct.
and that sort of thing. And that's why, just before you brought up this lovely story about the church, I thought, there's all these church cemeteries, and if you belong to a church, that must be one wonderful asset that a lot of churches do have their own little cemeteries still.
Unfortunately, a lot of those church cemeteries require vaults.
Oh, really?
That's true, and I'm sorry to say it, but even cemeteries that historically have not had vaults, for instance, you can go out into a cemetery in Orange County where graves have been dug since the mid-1800s, and those will be sort of lumpy, where the coffin has decayed and the body has decayed and the ground has settled over it.
Which is what it's supposed to do in the
Well,
ground.
yeah. But the newer graves are all flat because at some point the cemeterian said, you know, I'm gonna have to go back and fill in those spaces so that I can get the lawnmower over those spots. What if we just make vaults a requirement? It's not his $2,500, let me tell you, for the vault. But the vault does no one any good except the guy who mows the grass.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
But the
But
guy
that-
who mows
that
the
is-
grass isn't paying for it.
That is the biggest shock to find out that that's required in so many places. I had no idea. I thought only people who were sort of afraid of nature wanted vaults. I just thought it was kind of a weird thing that a few rich people did or something.
And so it's entirely based on the maintenance
On the
of
maintenance.
cemetery.
That's correct.
They
It
can't
is.
run heavy equipment over it
Right.
to trim it as easily and all.
Right.
And
And when they are digging adjacent graves with heavy equipment, the outriggers that go out to support the machinery
Uh-huh.
will press down as it's digging in the hole to dig the grave, so it will press down on either side, on the ground on either side of the machine,
Mm-hmm.
and there may be graves there. And if that's the case, then it is pressing down on those graves. Now, if you're going as green as possible, you would want a hand-dug grave. I don't know about your backyard, but my backyard would not support hand-digging a grave. I am full of rocks and terracotta pots.
That was another thing I was going to ask. At one point, I bought a house out in the country, and there was a persimmon tree, and I thought, oh, and this I was a lot younger then, but I thought, oh, when I die, I'd like to be buried under that persimmon tree. And then someone told me that you're not allowed to just bury in yards because of health issues or whatever, but you're saying maybe you
Then
can.
somebody lied to you.
People will tell you a lot of things that
I
have
could have been
have
buried
become-
under my
people,
persimmon
you
tree.
could. People
You
will
still
tell you.
can.
People will tell you a lot of things that have become common knowledge. They're sharing this in good faith, but they're wrong, and that's part of the educational thing that we need to do. One thing I get with the plain pine boxes and explaining what I do, over and over I hear, well, my father or my grandfather would have done, he would have loved that. I didn't know you could still do that.
Mm-hmm.
You can, but we need to know. And if you don't choose what we do, it doesn't offend me, but I want you to make an informed choice.
And to know, that's why I'm so glad that you're all here in this program, because even though I thought I knew a little bit, there's a lot I realize now I didn't know at all, like vaults being the
There's also been
forced on you.
we've had a strong cultural tradition of we don't want to know either. That this is a hands-off taboo subject. It's very difficult for some people to make any plans around this because
Yeah,
you don't like to think it might apply to me.
yeah. Although I hope that's changing, at least, maybe I'm just at the age, and I have a lot of friends who are older, you know, we talk about death a fair amount. It's not like some taboo subject, not that it's our only subject, but Emily, you were about to
Yeah,
chime
as,
in.
as I understand it, John, if a person doesn't want to do the entire scope of the green burial thing, the caskets that you make are, a person can purchase your casket and deliver it to a funeral home. And
Yep.
they have no right to refuse that.
That is absolutely correct. You do not have to buy your casket from your service provider, and you're well within your right.
So, is this going for a break? Okay, we're gonna take a break, make a few announcements, catch your breath, and we'll get back to this fascinating subject.
This is Will's Wake Up Call on WCOM and LP, Chapel Hill and Carrboro, 103.5 FM. You can stream us live at WCOMFM.org.
Okay, announcements, Dick Paddock, our dear friend, left this for me. The Southern Anti-Racism Network is going to have a program on April 16th at the Hayti Heritage Center Gallery in Durham at 5:30. It's plugging the school to prison pipeline, plugging that pipeline, the school to prison pipeline. And they're gonna be presenting, somebody from the Guilford County School Board. Joel Brown is the chair of the Chapel Hill Carrboro City School Board. She'll be also one of the presenters. And Teresa Elamine will, from SARN, the Southern Anti-Racism Network, will be the presiding facilitator. Refreshments will be served. For more information, contact Teresa at, well, I'll just give the phone number. Call 919-824-0659. Actually, I could put you can also do Teresa at projectsarn.org. That's not too difficult one. Teresa, Teresa, Teresa at projectsarn.org or 919-824-0659. So that will be at the Hayti Center, which is such a beautiful place that they have rescued from when they tried to almost destroy the black financial district in Durham years ago with 147, which I still hate to drive on that. It's so much bitter memories about the argument about that. But the Hayti Heritage Center is a beautiful church that is now a community center and is really lovely. And the other thing is, it's going to be, the Raging Grannies are going to be singing tomorrow at in Raleigh at the headquarters for Reynolds Tobacco.
Circle K.
At Circle K, it's the Circle K headquarters. And the fight has been struggling against Reynolds Tobacco for the Vuzzy cigarettes that are coming out more and more. The Surgeon General about how teenagers are, when we thought we had kind of licked a lot of the smoking habit, that this is like an encouragement with all the flavors to get back into getting a nicotine addiction, which can go from there to cigarettes, unfortunately. So the Farm Labor Organizing Committee has been protesting against that. We're there for the farm workers who, when they're picking tobacco, that's a horrible kind of farm work to do because it's poisonous with all that, the juice comes off the plant. It's very miserable. My son years ago, was now an old guy too, but when he was, had a summer between college semesters, picked tobacco one summer. I think he lasted for the first month, and he said it was worse than with another job he had working on the road, you know, for the roads, a summer job. It was horrible. So that's going to be a protest for the farm workers against Vuzzy cigarettes. And Circle K is this sort of like the 7-Elevens. They sell a lot of cigarettes. Get your gas, get your cigarettes, all at the same time. And we've been protesting locally, and now we're going to their regional headquarters and hope we can make a difference. So the grannies will sing, and Will be there too. So back to our guests, we're talking about green burial. and with Ann Weston and John Jewell, who is a casket maker, and Ann Weston has a green burial project, which I think at this point we're gonna talk about some more. And we also have Emily Keel, who's a Wilf sister, who is the one met these folks and got them on the program for us. So we're really delighted to have all three of you
Thank you.
as our guests today. So, and anybody, as you can see, we're very informal, just, grab a mic whenever you have something you want to say. So I want to start off in this second part of the show, learning more from Ann about the Green Burial Project.
The Green Burial Project is my own company. I am all of the employees. It's a 501c3 educational nonprofit with the sole aim of educating the community and advocating for the environmental, financial, and spiritual benefits of returning our bodies to the earth in a way that's consistent with our values when we were alive. I started this business about 4 years ago, as I said, in response to my attorney asking who gets the body. And I learned very quickly that with about 2 or 3 months of research, I became the local expert on green burial because people just hadn't been talking about it. So I am pleased when people say, "Oh, I've heard a little bit, what else can you tell me?" Because I can talk for a long, long time.
So wonderful. I had heard a little bit at the senior center some years back, and I think some attorney, maybe it was your attorney, somebody was going to be on about it, and I never got. They hadn't set a date yet, and I never did find out. Where I first heard anything about this was years ago. If anybody is old enough to remember the Whole Earth catalog.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah.
And yes, and there was a story in the Whole Earth catalog about these monks, maybe Franciscan, I'm not quite sure, and how they did their burial, that they did not do formaldehyde, that they did their praying, and then they would wrap the body in a white shroud, a linen shroud, and then bury it in the earth, so it would become part of the earth, which is what we're. So what is it in the Bible? Dust to dust, where we come from the earth and we return to the earth, and I was so taken by that idea and that way of doing it, and I thought that would be so nice, that's when I saw the persimmon tree, and then was told mistakenly that, oh, no. Well, so, and the other thing I've learned talking to you all is that North Carolina is one of the better states in terms of not having restrictive laws. So there are people who are saying you can't do this and you can't do that. Maybe have come from other states that have these restrictive laws.
Some of those ideas about what is law are actually cemetery policy too, that they ask about their cemetery, and their cemetery said, oh, we can't do that. And there was a thought that that's statute somewhere. No, that's policy somewhere. The vaults, that's somebody's policy. That's
Yeah.
not anybody's statute. And
Just
so,
for convenience.
again, these ideas become generalized in a way that they shouldn't have. But again, it's about education.
Well, that's why I'm so glad we're doing this show, and we can go out and be talking about it. It'll be out on TV, and it'll be on YouTube, and so we can encourage lots of people to learn more about it. This is fascinating.
I think an excellent point at this time would be to tell people where they can actually have a completely green burial. There aren't a lot of places, but right here in Carrboro.
Well, and you're absolutely right about that. Last fall, the Board of Aldermen of Carrboro voted to amend the town code to permit green burial in the old Carrboro Town Cemetery, which is about 200 yards from our studio here.
Which I just found out about.
We could walk over among the graves.
Okay.
It's a beautiful historic cemetery. There are graves there from the 1800s. And This is sort of a pilot project to see if there's demand for it. I hope there will be.
I hope so too.
It's a gorgeous little cemetery, and at the moment, it is my number one spot. Were I to fall down dead, that would be where I would have my husband haul me off.
Oh, okay. So is that the only place around here?
Historic Oakwood Cemetery in Raleigh, which again is a beautiful historic cemetery, has opened in the last couple of years a section called Mordecai's Meadow that buries green. It is different than the Carborough Cemetery. It is different than the cemetery in Wake Forest. Green cemeteries can make their own policies, as other cemeteries do, and some require that you get a marker stone from the grounds of that cemetery so that they know it's a native stone. Some don't permit markers at all. Some will identify grave spots by GPS coordinates and will have a little brass disc that identifies the spot. And Historic Oakwood will allow monuments like they do in the regular lawn cemetery. So each is different. Also, there's recently opened a section in the Highland Meadow Cemetery in Fayetteville. There's one in Candler, Asheville, and the only conservation burial ground where the land is protected by a land trust is in Mill River, North Carolina.
Where's that?
That's very close to Asheville.
Okay.
That is a gorgeous piece of land. They're restoring it, and it's beautiful.
Oh, go ahead.
And then the last one I know of is the Sanctuary of the Burro, which is a little tiny place out in Moncure. But again, the property is gorgeous, and the people there are thoroughly committed to burying green, and would like to talk to anybody who'd be interested in the spot out there.
Well, Moncure holds special meaning because we spent a year going every week supporting a strike out there in the plywood factory, and that was several years ago. And so we got to know a lot of people in Moncure. We got to know a lot of people in Pittsburgh. The town was very supportive. So that's...
It doesn't surprise you then that there would be a green burial ground
No,
there.
it doesn't. There's some wonderful, wonderful people there. So what is it called?
The Sanctuary of the Burro, B-U-R-R-O-W.
The Sanctuary of the Burro. Oh my goodness. Well, what about, you mentioned about the church that the woman, that lovely story with the woman you were talking to. Have you done any survey of churches around here?
Well, I haven't. I have walked a number of cemeteries and graveyards around churches, and I have tried communicating with the pastors and administrators of some of those churches. Last year, though, I did make a contact with one in Hillsborough. I'm not really allowed to give out his name because he does not want to be overrun. But if somebody had and was at need, I am authorized to give his name out to that family. But that's what I'd like to see. You know, when we talk about environmentalism, think of all the little cemeteries around that maybe have been abandoned.
Yeah.
Or have lots of extra space maybe because the congregation has shrunk over the years. And they've got space. People would like to have space. Could there not be some sort of arrangement by which the congregation could get a little money, the consumers could get burial spots,
Yeah.
and the families would have the satisfaction of knowing that the ground would be set aside in perpetuity, as
Yeah.
long as perpetuity lasts these days,
Yeah.
to be protected and cared for.
Yeah.
So anybody who happens to know of a congregation that has a cemetery that would be interested in talking about going green, I'd love to talk to them.
Yeah, there's some lovely churches out in the country around here. I mean, you don't have to drive very far that you see some likely spots. That'd be funny, picking the church not by how.
Not by the denomination.
Not by the
Space.
denomination, but
Space for their little-
can I have my final resting place be here? So you started this green burial project, and so you go give talks. at
I do
different-
give talks. This morning I spoke at UNC Hospice. I've spoken in the last week to the Alamance Hospice. I had Duke Hospice give me a call to consult with a fellow in northern Person County whose mother is very ill, and she wanted to be buried on their family property. And we talked on the phone for 45 minutes, and I gave him the name of a home funeral guide for when that time comes. And before I had a chance to send an email to my colleague who's the home funeral guide, she was already on the telephone talking to this fellow. So he was very committed and grateful for the support for something that he sort of knew intuitively that he ought to be able to do, but just didn't know if there were papers to sign or people to tell or licenses to get. And he was just delighted to hear that there was none of those things.
So that there's somebody who's a home funeral guide.
That's correct. There are those people here in Orange County.
So do you want to give out like a few, or should they just contact you if people want to find out more about how you would do that?
Yes, I'd be happy to talk to them. Either the ideal thing is to send me an email, and I will send you a little list of local folks. And
So a home funeral guide would be to tell you how you go about it, like if the person either dies at home or even in the hospital, how you do that.
it would be body preparation, paper filling out,
Yeah.
getting the death certificate, contacting someone like John.
They can also guide you through making those decisions on how hands-on you want to be. You may not want to go the full 9 yards, and you don't have to, because we have different comfort zones.
Yeah,
I would, after my participation in this, I would say go the full 9 yards. It's going to be an amazing experience.
yeah.
But we also, until you've been there, it's very intimidating. There's
I was just
an
thinking
ick
that.
factor. There's a, what is it going to be like? I've been involved in preparing bodies for burials a couple of times now, and I don't remember what my preconceived idea was, but whatever it is, that's not what it was really like. But when I finally got my head around it, I was coming home from one of these things, and I realized I helped a dead man put on his shirt today, meaning he would have done it for himself, but he couldn't. So we as the community were there to help him get dressed. It was actually easier than dressing a toddler, by the way. It's, but
Less
there
resistance.
was no ick factor to it. It was, and it was done from a place of compassion, which I'm not sure it would have happened that way, or I don't think it would have felt that way if we left that to the professionals instead of the community.
Yeah.
If roll them into room number 3, that's Mr. Look at the chart to figure out who it is, as opposed to being with him throughout this thing.
Well, I've seen in the movies, where in olden times, I guess, or earlier times, where they tenderly wash the body, and
That's what it is.
close the eyes, and so, but it would be a little scary to me without a little bit of guidance. I mean,
And only because
We're
you
not-
didn't help your grandmother do it, and you didn't help your mother
that's
do it.
right.
You
That's
don't know
right.
how. I mean,
We don't know how.
when I got married, we bought chicken breasts in the store in plastic packages. When my mother got married, she bought whole chickens in the store. When my grandmother got married, she went out and she killed the chicken. I couldn't anymore kill a chicken today than nothing because I haven't been trained. It's kind of scary to me, but I liken it to death care. It's nothing that our grandmothers and great-grandmothers haven't done.
Oh yeah, everybody then, and people would come from church. They all were familiar with death. I mean, I know when my grandfather died, his body was in our house. He was in a casket, you know, I guess the funeral had picked him up, he'd been in a nursing home for a few months, but the casket was in the living room, because I remember going and going up, I was 5, and touching his hand and trying to understand death, and you know, but it was all this purple satin or white satin around, you know, it was very, very pretty, but at least it was that familiarity. You know, he was in our home for a few days, friends and family came over and talked and you know, before the actual funeral, so it was very intimate in that way. But the body had been prepared before it was brought, you know, by the funeral director. So even back then, so yeah, it's we've lost how to do a lot of things, and but that's why this home, what was it called, a home
Funeral guide.
home funeral guide, that would be a very important person to be able to get in contact with to help you.
Because
Sure.
the home funeral guide will tell you that you can transport your own dead. You do not need a transport permit. All right? So,
Okay.
so
You can get an
about 10,
ambulance, I guess, or
no,
just,
you just take them in your car.
just.
Or you take them in the back of the pickup truck. About 10 years ago, friends of mine lost their 21-year-old son. They had expected him to die from the day he was born. But on one Saturday morning, when he was 21, he finally did. And even though they'd known for 21 years that he was going to die, they had not made arrangements. So that was a day of making arrangements. And at one point, my friends said to me, "Would you please drive us to the funeral home with our son?" And I said yes. What else could I say? I mean, if your friends ask you for a favor when their son has just died, do you ever say no? I'm not sure that you could. But we got in the van. They sat on the back seat with Joseph across their lap. And I looked in the rearview mirror, and it was a perfect pietas setting.
Yeah.
Was it not? With the grieving parents over their only son.
Oh,
And I drove with a sense of honor and purpose and dignity down the road in this little van taking Joseph to the funeral home. All the cars in the family, people's family, came behind us. And when we pulled into the parking lot, the people at the funeral home brought the gurney out. The family put him on the gurney. The family walked in procession with the gurney, not letting the funeral director touch it until we were at the door where we would say goodbye to him. And it was one of the most humbling experiences of my life. And we could do that with our own dead at any
Yeah.
time.
yeah. So,
I was gonna jump back in, that related to that, one of the aspects of, that I felt in preparing the body is, if it's been a death in the hospital, they come back with the IV still in, just snipped off, with all the EKG tabs still in place, bandages, and it's much like recovering dignity, like taking back from that medical industrial process and saying, now we're going to restore some dignity. Now we're going to get it back to a purity, a humanity. It's very much that. It's we got you this one last time.
so John, do you want, people wanted to get in touch with you, whether they were gonna do green burial or something else, that they may wanna have a casket that you make?
I'm welcome to have people get in touch with me for a casket that I
Yeah,
make.
so how would that, what is the,
I'm going to suggest you find me through my website, which is Aldergrove Caskets. That's ALDERGROVE Caskets.com.
Aldergrove,
Aldergrove.
all one word?
Yeah, like a whole grove full of alders. It's a,
Yeah.
we had a farm out west, and that was the name of that.
Yeah, Aldergrove
Caskets.com.
casket.
I can also be found through the Carolina Casket Makers Collective, which is also more Googleable and more easily remembered and more
Okay,
easily
then.
spelled.
Aldergrove Casket's a K and it's got an S.
Caskets, yep. And
.org.
as long as we're being commercial, I'm going to be down at the Spring Agricultural Festival in Pittsburgh Saturday. If anyone
Oh.
wants to stop by, we can continue the conversation down there.
The spring, what kind of?
It's called the Spring
agriculture?
Ag Fest.
Oh.
The Chatham County Extension has a beautiful facility down there. And now that spring's finally here, they'll have animals, they'll have food trucks,
Oh.
everything you could want on a day out.
Oh my gosh, and what time is it?
I think the official fair is 10 till 2. If you Google Spring Ag Fest, Chatham County.
So it ends pretty early in the afternoon, so that's
Yeah,
good to
while
know.
the sun's still up and it's still warm.
Yeah, 10 to 2, okay. Spring Ag Fest this Saturday. And then what was this, aldergrovecasket.org, is it?
.com.
.com, and then
I'm trying to
what
be commercial about this.
yeah, well, just when somebody's listening, me, and what was the other one,
Carolina Casket Makers Collective.
Carolina Collective, Casket Makers Collective.
And that's what I mentioned earlier, that's more about referral and dissemination of education and a part of that.
Okay, so that's all part of this whole thing.
We're loosely associated, does that sound fair?
I think that's fair.
You might call it disorganized, but I'm gonna go with
Oh,
loosely
hey.
associated.
I think we're better than that.
Okay, you're better than that.
So one can have the plain pine box made, but it's done with love, and it's just,
Here's how I think about that plain pine box, and this again evolved through trying to get my head around what is this calling and what am I responding to, what do I do? And my current thought is I enclose sacred space. That space already exists, but you can't see it. I wrap it up in pine. I put some handles on the outside so you can move it around. But the purpose of that space is for you to create the ceremony that you need within that. Whether that's grandmother's quilt, a shroud, a favorite Halloween costume, that's for the family and friends to work out what that space is about. And that's what I do. I wrap up that space.
okay.
And if you need something different about the wrapping, we can talk about that, but no Star Trek pods.
No what?
No pods from Star Trek. No, nothing, I'm not going there.
Yeah, no. So this is just wonderful information and certainly thought-provoking for all of us. And it's so encouraging to know there's a place right here in Carrboro
There is.
that we can check out.
Absolutely.
So I
I
guess you
encourage you to get out in the lovely spring weather and take a walk.
Yeah, and check it out with the town, I guess,
Mhm.
what the regulations are for there. Are there any particular regulations?
Not that I know of. You need to be dead, but you can, you can get very green. And even if you are from outside of town, they have sufficient space there right now to sell to people who do not live in Carrboro. So call the Public Works Department.
Okay,
And
and how much is the space? You don't,
I know that for out-of-towners, it's $1,500. I don't know of a cheaper place than that.
And that includes perpetual care.
Yeah,
I
that's
guess.
correct. That's correct.
and for in-towners, it's a little less,
That would be my guess, but I don't know
but
for
not
sure.
sure.
Since I live in Hillsborough, I'm really kind of self-centered about this.
So that's 1,500, and if you're thinking about cremation, that's not free either.
Well,
No, it isn't.
it's not.
Yeah, that's about the same price probably.
Last time I made the phone calls for someone, the price range was the absolute bottom was $8.99, up to 3.5 times that amount. And I was asking for exactly the same service, and I called 4 providers that I know of. That was the range for the same thing.
Quite a variation.
So even if you're going there, make some calls.
Make some calls,
Yeah.
yeah.
That is really one of the most important things that we could end with, is that this is not sort of pick up the phone and do it kind of affair. This is something that takes some thought, conversation in the family, and please do, comparison shopping. A Funeral Consumers Alliance chapter of the Piedmont has done price surveys of the funeral homes in their community, and as John says, the prices for the same exact service are wildly different. What you can get for a $4,000 cremation, I have no idea. It's just,
Well,
it's an astonishment.
When I
to
asked the
me.
question, exactly what you get for an $8.99 cremation.
So,
Ask
so
around.
buyer beware, but also talking about green burial, think about your values, and as more and more of us become concerned about the environment, when you think about, I think they started formaldehyde in the Civil War, from what I understand.
That's correct.
Absolutely.
Yes, and that was because the soldiers, to be sent home from so far away so that the body preserved it till it could at least get home. And they never did that before then, and that was the main purpose of it, was to preserve the body till it could get across however many days to get across the country. So,
I just want to say one last thing too, is don't rule out under your favorite persimmon tree as a final resting place.
no, I don't have that
Investigate,
persimmon
well,
tree
for others.
Yeah, but for others, that's yes. Don't forget that under your
It may be
lilac,
an option.
Yeah.
under your lilac bush, or under your favorite redbud tree.
A friend's farm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Even if you don't have much space, like I'm in an apartment now. Yeah, but somebody you know may have property in a farm. That's a big thing to think about. So you're right. This is not something that Americans are always in a hurry and pick up the phone. This is something, while you can give some thought to and make some plans, investigate, look into this, that, and the other option.
The other piece, if we have just a moment, is when you're making those calls, there's another piece to listen for. A friend of mine was making those calls, and he felt he wasn't hearing something he needed, and he couldn't figure out what it was, so he just kept kind of asking, because it didn't feel right yet. On the 7th call, the person he was speaking to was the first one to say, "I'm sorry for your loss."
Oh.
So these people are going to be with you through this. They need to still recognize that they're through with you through something significant. And I don't know, I don't have any reason to think that correlates with how much you're spending, but listen to see if they have a heart too.
Okay, we've had Ann Weston, we've had John Joe, we've had Emily Keel, and we're talking about green burial. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for having us.